Good morning, everybody in Europe, and good afternoon for those of you who join from Southeast Asia. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Klingenau Institute and CICP, the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. My name is Louise van Schijk. I'm head of unit for EU and Global Affairs at the Klingenau Institute, and I will moderate today's webinar. This event is actually part of an EU-funded project, EU-ASEAN Think Tank Dialogue for Strategic Partnerships, that we run together, Klingenau and CICP, for 3 years. And today we celebrate the end of the second year, where we focused in our discussions and analysis on the twin transitions of green and digital. And afterwards we will continue on climate adaptation. And at the end of this year, we will host a live conference in Cambodia, Phnom Penh. The event of today also marks the launch of a policy brief called Plugging Green Power in EU-ASEAN Partnership. So that's the topic also of today. So what are we actually talking about? Well, we're talking about these smart digital solutions that can help our green transition. Because the sun is not always shining and the wind is not always blowing. So how can we assure that we always have enough energy to switch on the lights in our apartments? And with the high price of electricity, wouldn't it be great if we could know the real-time price of electricity? So for instance, just by looking at our phone or a smartwatch, and then you can do your laundry when it's cheaper to allow us to save money. Actually, this is already a reality in some countries like Denmark, and in the Netherlands, we're starting with it. And it's not only a luxury issue so that you know when the electricity is cheapest, it's also a necessity to relieve the congestion on busy grids. And only today here in the Netherlands, our grid infrastructure company also asked, could the big industry please take into consideration when more cheap, meaning green, electricity is available when producing their products? So the countries of the EU, but also the ASEAN region, they share this challenge of climate change, but also higher energy demands and higher fossil fuel prices, that most of it they have to import. So combining, let's say, this need for green transition with also digital solutions to optimize it provides a lot of opportunities so that we can build a more sustainable, smart, clean, and efficient energy system. However, it also comes with new challenges with regard to how to finance it, technical and regulatory barriers, as well as potential cybersecurity risks. I mean, it all sounds very good, all these smart and digital technologies, but basically it means, software, appliances, all these things that you can also attack with cybersecurity in the field of cybersecurity. So basically, we talk about several questions today. The first is, how can the EU and ASEAN accelerate the green transition in a smart way? The second is, what is the role of these smart technologies? And the third is, what can the EU and ASEAN gain from working together next to working with, for instance, China and the US, their other partners? So the program of today consists of first opening remarks by the EU delegation to ASEAN. Then we have 2 poll questions for you, a panel with eminent speakers, questions and answer. Please type your questions in the chat that should be enabled. And finally, we will have closing remarks by our partner, Ambassador Poo Sotirak, the director of CICP. So to get going, first we will have the opening remarks, and I'm really glad that we are joined today by Henriette Vergeman. She's the first Counselor for Environment Climate Action at the delegation of the European Union to ASEAN. And before that, she has worked for many, many years in Brussels at the European Commission's DG Clima and also at the EU delegation to India. And she's always worked on the issues of energy and climate change. So she will talk about, the role of the EU in the cooperation with ASEAN on green and smart energy, and also why this is of so much interest for the EU nowadays. Henriette, with further ado, I would like to give the floor to you, please.
Thank you very much, Louise, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, okay. Okay, so thanks a lot for letting me speak here today on this indeed really very important topic. I know that we have a lot of things to cover, so I will try to be brief. But I wanted to just start by giving a little bit of context on the whole question of energy and smart and what we are trying to do. So, of course, as you already mentioned, during this last year, we've seen a really huge increase in the global energy prices. And this, as we all know, is the direct effect of Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. And this has really been a big disruption to the global energy systems and affecting people all over the world and really given a lot of price volatility and even energy security risks. So in the EU, of course, we are the immediate neighbors to this situation, and we have come forward with a plan that we call Repower EU, and which is really trying to see how we can increase Europe's strategic resilience and independence from unreliable suppliers, such as Russia, before 2027. And this plan, Repower EU plan, has three main goals, and that is to, of course, first initiate further energy savings and energy efficiency, to accelerate, speed up the energy transition and to really strengthen the homegrown renewable production, and also to diversify the EU's energy supplies. Now we are in the, we're putting this plan into practice. We're coming forward with new legislation to really make this, put this into practice. We have already been forced to, and we have managed to significantly reduce our energy consumption through savings and efficiency, and we will continue to do that. We are also building long-term partnerships with reliable partners that cover both gas and a commitment to energy transition technologies, including, for example, green hydrogen, in line with the EU's long-term commitment to be climate neutral by 2050. So important to say that contrary to what some people say, we are not abandoning our climate neutrality goal, even if we are in a difficult situation right now. And just this week, we will be organizing a large-scale conference on energy security and green hydrogen for this region here in ASEAN, on the Pacific, Asia Pacific, in Kuala Lumpur. And this is really a part of this building of partnerships. So I wanted to strengthen this at the onset of our talk, that we are building partnerships with reliable partners on all these issues. We're also working to ensure additional gas supplies. And as an example, we are looking into how we can tackle methane leaks and address venting and flaring, and really make sure that we are not wasting valuable sources, losing them into the climate and increasing climate problems at the same time. So really trying to see how we can have a joint benefit of these two things. And of course, this also opens up new commercial opportunities for our interested partners. So now turning a little bit to the ASEAN EU, more specific energy cooperation, which goes back 40 years and which covers really a lot of different types of technical cooperation and also political dialogue. I think you are aware that just last December, a couple of months ago, at the EU-ASEAN summit, we agreed on establishment of a formal EU-ASEAN energy dialogue, and we hope that this can serve as a platform of policy dialogue and also promotion of business and industry exchange and setting up cooperation programs in the energy sector. There are really a lot of possible areas of dialogue and cooperation between our two regions, of course, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, regional power integration and energy trading, modernization and digitalization, as is the topic of today, just energy transition, energy security, and so on, and of course, including finance also. So to support the implementation of what we call the Global Gateway in Southeast Asia, we are preparing a sustainable connectivity package as part of a wider Team Europe initiative together with our EU member states. We will combine the cooperation with ASEAN at the regional level with targeted actions at country level and build synergies with actions that are already happening, for example, by the European Investment Bank, EU member states, and also design complementary actions under the European Fund for Sustainable Development. This package will cover priority areas for all kind of connectivity priority areas, such as trade and economic connectivity, energy connectivity, digital connectivity, transport connectivity, and people-to-people connectivity. So you can see that this is right at the center of what we are talking about here today. On energy specifically, we will focus on regional integration of electricity markets in the ASEAN region. And also we will have a Green Team Europe initiative, which we will implement in partnership with ASEAN, which will also work on the region's wider transition towards clean energy and greater energy efficiency. And also just at the end, I know I'm coming to the end of my time, just to mention that here in Southeast Asia, together with our G7 partners, we have started implementing what we call just energy transition partnerships in Vietnam and in Indonesia. And these partnerships will really put on the table concrete sums of money to facilitate the transition from coal into renewables. On the European side, we will offer financing by the European Investment Bank and combined with the development banks of our member states. So you can see we have really a lot going on these issues, and I'm super excited to be here today and hopefully also learn from others how we can make all this come together for the benefit of all. So thank you so much.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much, Henriette, and really impressive to learn more about, what the EU is all doing. Sometimes if we listen to you, then we think like, wow, what is all of this? Team Europe initiatives, so the member states and the EU institutions, how much financing is actually provided, Global Gateway. But slowly but surely the EU is kind of, I always compare the EU to a kind of oil tanker, if it sets in motion these policies, then slowly, it's shifting and then, full speed ahead. And I think that's also something that we're going to witness, including in the ASEAN region, that the EU really takes this serious. That being said, of course, it's not the only player in the region. There will also be, let's say, only a little bit of support from the EU, but a lot of investments will come from the region itself, from the private sector, from hopefully a lot of unicorns and startups that are emerging everywhere across the globe on the green and digital transitions. So we will also hear from the panel later on a little bit more about that. But it's impressive, let's say, what is set in motion and what the EU's aiming at and contemplating at, and it's also well understood in light of the changed energy security situation. All right, we will move on because now we have actually two poll questions where also all the participants of this Zoom call can join. And I would like to ask my colleagues if we can upload the first poll question. It's based on a report that was just published by the Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, ICIAS. And the question is, what is the top challenge facing Southeast Asia today? For people answered that from the region. So is it deteriorating human rights? Is it climate change, political instability, or is it unemployment and economic recession? So let's see what you have in mind, the audience. Poll question 1. Oh, I just see that I can't vote as a host of this webinar. So let's see what is the outcome. Wow, in our audience, climate change comes out first. Wow, we have an excellent audience now. In fact, in reality, the first answer that people in the region gave was unemployment and economic recession. So that's their top level concern. But the second concern was climate change. And this was a big change from last year. So climate change in the polling became way more important, and it's clear that the people in the ASEAN region recognize climate change more now as a force of serious concern. So then I would like to move on to the second question that we have in the poll. Let's see if it's available. In your view, which country or regional organization has the most political and strategic influence in the region? China, the US, the EU, or the ASEAN countries themselves in the ASEAN as organization? So curious to see what this audience thinks of this question. Right. I think this was sufficient time to vote. Let's see what is the result. Ooh, wow. China comes out very high with 61%, and then ASEAN as an influential international organization in the region, then the US, then the EU. We obviously, from the European side and from the European Commission, still have a lot of work to do, Henriette, sorry for that. But maybe it's also acceptable, and maybe this field of green and digital are exactly the fields where we can make a difference. Well, in the real polling, the results were a bit similar, although China came out with 41%, the US with 32%, ASEAN with 13%, and the EU with 9%. So the picture that we see here is maybe a bit more biased towards ASEAN and a bit less biased towards the EU and the US. But I think it's quite interesting to see the results of the actual poll and also what we see here with you, all our participants. And I hope that we will see more of you when posing questions in the chat. Let's move on to the panel because we have 3 eminent speakers that we will join us and share their thoughts on this issue of green and digital with us today. The first speaker of the panel is Dr. Henry Chun. He is a senior research fellow at the CICP, the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace, and a partner organization, and also co-author of the policy brief together with Giulia Creti, who will moderate the Q&A later on. He is also an adjunct research fellow at the Integrated Development Studies Institute in Manila. He has a background in engineering and biopharmaceutical, and his research interests range from China's economic development, tech and growth, ASEAN studies in digital transformation and climate change. So he's really well placed to speak about this topic, and we have also noticed that in several of the sessions that we have run throughout this year. The same I can say for the second panelist, Dr. Beni Suryadi. He is actually the project manager at the ASEAN Center for Energy and a real energy professional with more than 12 years of experience in managing programs and conducting research on energy and climate change. He is currently leading energy partnerships with the US, Russia, China, India, Norway, and also international development agencies, and overseeing multi-million project portfolios, including in the ASEAN Energy and Climate Change Project. Then we are joined by Liana Yo Olds, and she is actually the general manager of Energy Orchestration Venture Incubator Team at Nokia. So she is one of these real tech people that know how software and digital technologies can help to accelerate the energy transition and the upgrading of green energy. She has over 10 years of experience in the energy sector, both in power utilities and in the tech as a tech vendor. She's super passionate about renewables and affordable energy. and is working across the industry to find ways digital can make a difference. And we've also experienced that in our closed sessions. So she was of tremendous help also, for instance, with providing feedback on the policy brief and real expertise in this field. Let's move on with our questions for the panelists and listen to them. The first question I would have is for Henry John. Henry, can you give us an update on the state of play on energy transition in ASEAN? So just a snapshot of what's going on. We just heard about the EU, but now we would like to hear from your perspective. Please, Henry, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Clinton and CSCP for inviting me to this conference. Now, ASEAN has been successful in raising the electrification in the last 20 years. You all know that after the 1998 crisis, ASEAN recovered economically in the 2000s. And at the same time, the priority of the government in ASEAN is how to raise the electrification rate in the regions. And I would say that ASEAN is one of a very successful region. In the case of Cambodia, they were able to raise it now to almost 99%. So except in a few countries like Myanmar, which still lacks, all the ASEAN countries has been very successful in electrifying the countries. But now they are facing a change that is both due to the climate change and technological evolutions. So the thing that we are seeing today, you can get a very good glimpse from the policy brief of Clinton Dell, is that ASEAN has been using a lot more coal as a percentage of energy source in the last 15 years. So we are facing a problem that ASEAN is one of the most affected by climate change. 6 of the 10 ASEAN member countries are listed among the top 20 affected by climate, and that accounts for almost 90% of ASEAN populations. So there's really now starting a very strong political movement on the ground on how to address the climate change issues, because ASEAN is very much affected. Now, the problem of ASEAN energy is like this. We all know that the key to decarbonizations and green energy is electrifying the energy system. So you can see the electric vehicles is going to replace internal combustion engines. And then in the Europe, you can already see slowly the heat pump is being promoted to replace the natural gas fire heaters. So electrification means to say that we have to build a very resilient electric grid. Unfortunately, in the last few years, ASEAN has no experience. So you can see that they are just moving into the solar energy and the windmill, which has a problem in the sense that they are very intermittent. So the challenge of curtailment is very high in ASEAN today. And ASEAN has no experience like Europe. Europe has been addressing this problem for quite some time. And in ASEAN, this COVID-19 really wrecked all the government's finances, except maybe in the case of Singapore. So what is the challenging thing? Number one is that when ASEAN need a lot of money to address the modernization of the electric grid so that it can handle a lot of solar power. Now, we must remember that whether it's beyond imaginations, that the price of solar panels and solar system has dropped 90% in the last 20 years. Today, the cheapest power one can find is solar power. So their focus before was to move into solar power. Without thinking about that is that they just produce during the mid of the day. And at nighttime, your power grid is going to be idle. So you have a lot of curtailment issues. The way that ASEAN power grid was designed, they can only handle 10 to 15% of upsurge, which means to say that if there are more than 10 to 15% power coming from solar or wind, the grid cannot do it. So I'm very happy because I have noted that the EU has put a lot of focus on the grid modifications. In fact, the October 2022 European Commission Action Plan for Digitalizing the Energy System has allocated a 584 billion grid investment in the 10 years from 2020 to 2030s. And that will serve as a very good blueprint for ASEAN, even though ASEAN is not present as much a problem as EU did, because EU is definitely moving full speed ahead in electric vehicles, which ASEAN is just starting. And ASEAN probably will move in that electric vehicle space, in which you need a much more robust grid in the next 10 years. So ASEAN's challenge is, how are we going to fulfill our commitment to the decarbonizations? Most ASEAN countries has committed to 2050 to 2060 zero emission target. Now, you must remember that power system setup has a depreciation life of 25 years. So if they commit to 2050 and 2060, they must do it now and in the next 10 years. They cannot be delayed. Now, is ASEAN ready for it? It's a big question mark. And it's very good that I listened to the introduction, Louis, and I think that what that the role that EU can bring in. And I must remind you that in the world today, if you talk about utilization of power from the source of renewable, EU is actually leading the world. And the topic that Louis chosen today is very timely, because a robust grid means a digitized grid. You need real-time informations. And at the same time, instead of 4G, in which we are now finding it very difficult to get a good use case, you can already see that if you want a very short latency time for the grid to respond, you need 5G communications. So in 5G, definitely Ericsson and Nokia are important players. In the electrical hardware system, in the IoT, definitely you have ABB, you have Schneider, you have Siemens. All these are very important European companies. So I feel that there's a lot of things to play to help ASEANs to these green and smart transformations. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I heard you speak a lot about, the coal dependencies across the region and the needs and the depleted finances after COVID. But what do you think would be really the priorities that are needed? And do you consider the renewable energy target of 23% by 2025? Is that realistic and feasible? And what about the the power connectivity and interconnections? And if I may, because you mentioned a lot of these European companies, are they also trusted and respected in the region, and are there also companies in the regions coming up? And maybe that's also for you, Benny Suryadi. I would also be interested to hear you, because I remember when we were writing our policy brief, we were thinking, wow, these are all European companies that are active in the digitalization of the energy infrastructure in the ASEAN region. But aren't there any others? And what is the competition look like? And what can we also learn from the ASEAN region for Europe? Because in Europe, we also face these huge problems that you just pointed out, as I mentioned today. The Grid Infrastructure Company of the Netherlands calls for industries to be more careful. And we have such high ambition targets that we could possibly also learn, let's say, from inventions in your region. So maybe what are the immediate priorities for the region? Maybe you could first tackle that one, please.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Now, personally, I feel is that this is a highly technical subject. So definitely financing is important because it's a high capital investment. But before that, I think that the technical expertise is probably even more important. Because right now we have a problem is that everybody's concept about power, they focus like the early generation always on the generating side. So if you look at the ASEAN liberalization, they always look at the GenCo liberalizations. Now, but in this, so before ASEAN normally invests less than 10% in the grid. Now, right now, if you're going to move the smart grid, you probably increase to 15 to 20%. So
sorry, Henry, just very quickly, you mentioned the GenCo liberalizations.
Oh, no? Generating company.
Yeah. Okay, please. Yeah.
Sorry, it's just Genco is generating company, and then you have transmission company, you have distribution companies. So before, the old setup is that the generating companies get all the most of the economic benefits, and then it is the distribution company, and then the transmission company. Now, right now, because of this very unique structures, this new smart grid requirement, there might be a need for you to consolidate the transmission and the distribution company. Now, many countries have already this setup of separations. Now, if you're going to put a smart grid, maybe a more reasonable technical approach is you have to integrate the two. And number two is that you have to raise the economic return for the distribution and the transmission company. Again, that's another change of existing models. So there's going to be a host of technical issues that before there's any talk about financing requirement, which I understand you is very generous, because in this just transition plan, I mean, you lend tens of billions of dollars to Indonesia and Vietnam for them to retire the coal plant. But retiring the coal plant alone is not enough, because you must remember, like it or not, these are baseload plants that can run 24 hours a day, 5,000 hours in a year. Now, all the renewables has this problem of intermittency. So in Southeast Asia, you can only run the solar for about 1,200 hours. You can probably run a windmill the most, the land-based, about 1,600, 1,700. For the sea-based, maybe you run 2002 to 2005. So there's a host of technical issues. And I think that ASEAN power grid is very diverse. You have archipelago like Philippines and Indonesia, whose power grid structure is very different from the Indochina island, which is more like a continental base. And it used to be that each of these power plants, these countries guard their national power transmission system like a state-owned assets whatsoever. So there's a host of technical issues. But with the EU experience, I really feel that probably if things are seriously done on a regional basis and on a country basis, it's probably in about 2 to 2.5 years' time you can have it done. Now, this EU company that we mentioned, now, first, a lot of ASEAN countries has a very long colonial legacy. So their familiarity with the European company is beyond doubt. Just like the French company, Indochina was under French for a long time. Malaysia and Singapore was under the British, and Indonesia under the Dutch. So there's really not much issue about the issue of trust. Now, if you talk about challenge, I will put it this way: America is not really that advanced in this space. China is rising very fast. But again, everything about China today get a political colors. So there might be pros, there might be cons. So I really feel that EU has a very important role to play in the sense that it is perceived as a neutral party. And number two, you have a deeper pocket. You're going to finance them. And number three is that technically speaking, there's no doubt. Of course, Chinese are much cheaper. And to be fair about it, State Grid now holds most of the patent in the world on electric transmissions and smart grid. But as I said, there are some political elements here. And to me, two countries is going to have a very good, important role here. One is EU, the other one may be China. I don't think that US can be a very serious player because they simply don't have the setup in the industries to support ASEAN green and digital transformations.
All right. Thank you so much, Henry. That was really fascinating to hear your perspective on, and also let's see what if the US indeed could be catching up also with its Inflation Reduction Act measures at home and stimulating the effort of the transition at home, the energy transition at home. I'm curious to see if that's going to work, you know, because in Europe, of course, we have a carbon pricing system through which we try to influence the market, and then combined with green industrial policy. But in the US, they're going to put everything on the subsidies. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how that's going to work out. But also very fascinating to learn more about, the challenges for ASEAN, also the island structures and the connectivity issues. And I'm really sure that also the next speaker, Beni Suryadi, has more to say to that. And I'm also curious, what kind of money is that? So it's loans mainly that are needed, investments that are needed. And the question is really, again, what are then the priorities and how can ASEAN, the ASEAN region reach its green energy and connectivity targets? And who are the partners from your perspective? And what is also the role of these private sector actors? Beni, that would be the first question for you. We would be curious to hear your perspectives on these issues, please.
Thank you very much, Louis. But first of all, thank you very much again for having. Congratulations on the newly released period. Already a crucial recommendation for the.
Beni, I think we seem to have some issues with your microphone. We can hear you, but with intervals. So I don't think we can hear you well enough. Let me check with my colleagues, and maybe we can try to fix it in another way, maybe with a different microphone.
Hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah, please. Okay, please. Yeah.
Okay. Alert me when I lost my voice again. But I mean, one is I would like to congratulate again on the new policy brief. I think it's provide a key recommendation on how ASEAN and EU together in addressing the issue on renewable energy. Respond to the question that you asked earlier, Louis, that mentioned several times earlier, our regional blueprint, the ASEAN Plan of Action for the Energy Cooperation, aims, among others, to achieve the aspirational target for increasing the component of renewable energy to 25 in the ASEAN energy mix, and power capacity to 35% by 2025. So I mean, 20% is commonly known, but the specific target on the power sector for having 35% is not really being. In terms of the connectivities, the ASEAN aims to expand the regional multilateral electricity trading and promote clean and renewable. Today, we are around 14% of renewable energy mix. On the our estimation through the 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook policy are projected to be unable to meet the regional target of the 23% of. So it's quite a big hump for the policymaker, for the stakeholders in this in the next 2 or 3 years. As has been made in the power sector. Earlier I mentioned we have 2 actually particular target on renewable energy. So focusing on the power sectors. Despite the pandemic situation, the ASEAN managed to deliver a groundbreaking already in 2020 Ultimately, from the 22 gigawatt of capacity that was added, 82% of the ASEAN new capacity was renewable. With, of course, thanks to the Vietnam, which is skyrocketing solar installation. But we also seeing other countries, and Philippines and Thailand, progressing with its renewable energy plan. Today, the share is about 34% of the 2025. The projection noted that the regional target will be exceeded to around 37 if all of countries be implemented their national policy based on their latest power development plan. Especially after COP26 and COP27, a lot of Malaysia moves forward with their renewable energy connection under the ASEAN Power Grid of 2022. There is around 7,700 megawatt capacity of the bilateral cross-border trading. 500 to 600 megawatt is ongoing, and we are planning to have an 18 to 21 gigawatt in plan. An interconnection master plan study. So the effort is progressing both at national and regional level. So around 3 years from now, the ASEAN expected to have another multilateral power trade into the existing Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore power integration projects for around up to 100 megawatts from Laos. If effort and support are needed enough to address all of this issue. That is why the ASEAN is continuously expanding its partnership with dialogue organization to advance this process. And who are
So
to respond?
so Benny,
that yes.
Benny, yeah, I think I have to intervene because you seem to be like with the solar and wind energy to have this intermittent quality of the microphone. So we can hear you, but then you fall out, and we can hear you back again.
Sorry.
So and I'm also really sorry because we really interested to hear more about what you have to say. So could I perhaps suggest that we first move on to Liana, and then maybe you could check out if you can have a microphone, another microphone for the computer, because it seems to be that it's not working on this laptop properly, and therefore we see you talking, but we lose you all the time, and that's really a pity because we would really be interested to hear. You have so much experience in this topic, and I think we really like to hear also your views on what you see the EU could contribute later on. So first, let me move to Liana Old, representative of Nokia, really this tech person that is super passionate about these smart technologies that can help to advance the green transition, and also has a clear view on the role of the private sector in that. So Liana, could you say a few more words on let's say your perspectives on these issues, please?
Absolutely.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I found that the topics very engaging already this morning with what we've been able to discuss. I think from a private company perspective and a tech company, there's a really big role for us to play. In fact, ENTSO-E in Europe published a vision paper last October, and a couple of the topics they mentioned were around the ability to better forecast and control assets, as well as be able to automate a lot of the functions that we probably see manually today around dispatch, automated dispatch, and understanding what's happening in the grid. And this needs to happen at a much lower level. I think if you look in Europe, we've done a great job, and I completely agree with Dr. Chen that my work in both the US and now in Europe has shown that Europe has really forged ahead and is really, I think, at the forefront of renewable penetration and using decarbonized fuels in order to power the grid and life as we know it. But it does come with challenges. As you mentioned, there's a lot of congestion now in the grid, especially in the Netherlands. I believe I read a few weeks ago they were actually starting to incentivize companies to not produce solar, which is exactly what we don't want to happen, unfortunately. And I do think that technology can play a role in this, both from a digital standpoint, like what we deal with. From a Nokia perspective, obviously communication is very foundational to anything we want to do on the grid. Anything that we want to control, we want to monitor, and it may not be just a 5G role. I see a lot of companies, power utilities, that have a combination of wireless LTE, 5G technologies, as well as fiber optic and IP and PLS. So I always think it will be a combination of wired and wireless technologies. But along with that, we're starting to see a lot more around edge compute technologies and open platforms and containerization of these functions. So we work with digital substations where we start changing the role rather than having just hardware-driven widgets, so to speak. We start seeing software and software-driven functions. And this allows the grid operators and the private investors, allows them to begin to keep their technology up to date and change in a much more rapid intervals. And so that way they get the latest technology, they can be more flexible when there are changes to regulation, changes to the market, and allows them to adopt those into the network, into the grid much more rapidly. From our perspective, I think there's no one company that will solve the entire problem. Not one company in the world will solve everything. I think it's going to be highly collaborative. And I was just at Distributech International a little over a week ago. And I watched one of our other colleagues in the industry look at and say the same thing. It's going to be Nokia working with an ABB, which we have already. We've worked with Siemens in the past. We've worked with GE. It's going to be these large private companies working together to help provide solutions that are more robust and end-to-end, because we all have our specialties. I also feel that being an outsider, when I say that, I mean a technology digital company, not necessarily an electrical grid infrastructure type company like some of the others, we can also bring a fresh perspective on maybe ways that we could potentially do things that we haven't before in a non-proprietary way. So I think there's a lot there that could happen. I did also find interesting, Louise, the poll and the responses for the poll, because I do think there's a very big tie between the green and the digital transition, as well as employment rates. I do believe that the industry is creating all kinds of new jobs that we don't even know may exist yet, and that there are ways that we should be supporting universities, trades, apprenticeships into these areas. As the grid evolves and as time moves on, a lot of those very strong individuals that were part of the grid back in the 1950s, 60s, as we began to really evolve, especially in Europe, and I can speak for the US very briefly on this one, but they're retiring. And we don't necessarily have that same talent or the same number of people in the workforce that we did. So I think that the employment is going to be an interesting, perhaps an interesting ancillary benefit of the green and digital transition.
Yeah, so the concerns that people in the region have about economics and employment opportunities, this green transition might also provide an answer, as long as they go into this technical and digital grid assisting professions, grid building professions almost. That's also something which is very acute here in Europe, in my own country, the Netherlands. I mean, the reason why we don't have a heat pump yet is because there's nobody to install it. So except from the material shortages, there's also the labor shortages here that are really acute, and also for the solar panels to install them, there are huge waiting lists. Yeah, so that's something also to take into consideration. But it's also, yeah, at the same time, of course, an opportunity for the region to solve some of these youth unemployment concerns and economic troubles people have.
If I could
So-
make one more comment just on something that Dr. Shannon mentioned about the grid operator and the investment that we're talking about. I know that I mentioned earlier the DNV report before the webinar, the DNV report that mentioned how many hundreds of billions of euros it would take in order to actually integrate. It's another way that I think the digital technologies could actually offset some of the cost of that grid infrastructure. It will need to be there, but we want to invest in a way that's appropriate, that's not having to be overbuilt. So maybe looking at ways that digital can help optimize the grid at multiple levels would be a really good way. And it would be something I would recommend with ASEAN as they're going into this this transition in their planning phase, is to plan digital along with the grid infrastructure and being able to partner those two together so you can make the best use of both technologies.
And what would you answer to the people that say, well, we can build now a lot of new grid and balance it out, but in the future people will have mini grids and their own batteries at home, and the factories will have their own small nuclear reactors. What would be your answer to them?
So I absolutely agree that highly distributed assets and storage will absolutely be the future. I think we will still continue to have large plants and transmission lines, but I do believe the most investment will be at the lower level, but that does not negate the need for the grid to be there to balance. What we're talking about is just optimizing that investment. And so when you optimize your own nano grid at home, or that industrial plant is optimizing its own electricity and the usage and consumption at that level, and then build up, but the grid will still need to be there to ensure the backup, the resiliency, and the security of supply.
Yeah, so it's the backbone of the system, and you need to do both. That's basically the answer. I saw that Benny is now back with the headset, and we're going to try. We agreed we're going to try to see if that works better. Benny, let's first give it a try. I think you talked already a lot about let's say the needs for the ASEAN region, but we are also very curious to hear your perspectives on how the EU could respond. So maybe you could just first say 2 or 3 sentences. We can check if your sound is okay, and then
Hello. Yes.
continue.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you hear
that
me now?
works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, again, apologize for the troubles. But before I respond to that question, that just a short summary from what I mentioned earlier, that ASEAN has a foundation to move to the direction on the energy transition. I mean, the success of the Vietnam is showing with the progress on the solar, and also the progress that we have in ASEAN power grids, which allow Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore interconnection project is among the proof that ASEAN can progress with its energy transition, but to the speed and the scale that being expected by the world. I mean, it's going to be in line with the directive as war is going with the carbon neutrality plan or net zero plan by mid of this century, that a massive effort is needed. And this is where, I mean, it's going to be, among other things, that EU is really expected to play a crucial partner for the ASEAN in addressing this green energy challenge. It's going to be, I mean, the potential for the cooperation with the ASEAN EU. I mean, it's going to be being mentioned before by Mrs. Andrea Bergerman, that the ASEAN EU energy dialogue is being established. It's going to be, and then where it's expected to join between us and EU in address the issue. A lot of potential cooperation that we have in area energy sector, which will benefit both low. ASEAN faces the challenge of the widening divide between the energy and demand and supply, fueled by its in its attempt to transition toward a clean energy development. The ASEAN member states encounter barriers such as a regionally fragmented market, strong incumbent utility market. This is a question that where the private sector could be playing roles, as mentioned earlier, and then heavy
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Then you had a long experience in evaluating and managing the energy market from the regional perspective, and can offer the perspective on the physical linkage, on the market development, and in the integration process itself. EU is also by mentioned earlier that use long-term market development and integration activities alongside with the EU Green Deal's related energy and climate related initiative can also serve as a constructive example to the ASEAN here in the region to employ this useful mechanism. And although the structure of decision-making process of the two organizations is different, I mean, it's going to be ASEAN with our ASEAN way, as to do the policy-making process or resource endowment and geographical characteristic. That's going to be in ASEAN, as also mentioned by Henry earlier, is very schematic on the geographical that put a challenge. But the experience that EU has is become a solid reference for the ASEAN to also address similar issues. And as everybody is talking, particularly the EU as the first region to commit to the carbon neutrality, so it could also pose a benchmark on the how the ASEAN should also pursue our own target for the carbon neutrality. It's being mentioned earlier that I think 8 or 9 countries, the region is also initiating that, I mean, stating they vision about the carbon neutrality or net zero, but it's still on the national level. It's not, I mean, it's not engaged as a regional commitment, which is now is become more central to this discussion. So, I mean, last point is the ASEAN could gain the wealth of experience related to the region, the EU clean energy transition, decarbonization technology, technical infrastructure integration, and energy market development. Such example can include like legal or regulatory frameworks, policy advice, technical assistance, technology knowledge transfer, that's also very crucial, and also modeling of regulatory frameworks. We have ASEAN Energy Regulatory Network and here in ASEAN, but it's not in the form that what they expected. I mean, how it's operated in EU levels. And the academic research expertise, this is also where you have this very strong foundation compared to what we have is here. Region. Last point is also ASEAN. I also learned a lot from the EU experience on establishing regional or national monitoring, reporting, and verification for the tracking progress of the common objective. I stop here. Luis, again, apologies for the audio issue.
No, it's all right. And I think it's very also relevant for the theme of this webinar to talk about, you know, this digital and smart and the importance of having the digital facilities in place and how that could work. And thank you for making the effort. Super interesting what you have to say, and also in the end, indeed, the different animals that the ASEAN and the EU are. The EU being a supranational entity with the common internal energy market, although it's also not optimally functioning always, and not all the parts of the EU are as well connected. But that's, of course, the ideal future, that you have super grids, and if the wind blows in the northwest, that the electricity can go to the south, and if then the sun shines on that side, and ideally we move into kind of global space, but that's probably really far far, far away. So thanks, and I'm sure that there will also be questions to you from the audience later on. I would like to go back to you now, Liana, and I would like to ask you, what exactly do you think the private sector needs in order to accelerate its contribution to fostering these smart solutions for the green energy transition? What are the things that you witness, you and other companies are looking for to do more?
Yes, I think a lot of that is really about being engaged in the new topics. I think that being engaged with governments and understanding where policy is going is really, really key. What's coming down the pipe, not only what's here now. I think sometimes we feel like we're trying to hurry to catch up. Something will change, and we're trying to figure out what that means for the market and how we can help. So I think earlier engagement in some of those conversations around policy and regulatory changes. I do believe that private-public partnerships are very, very key in helping understand what the grid operators and some of the other regulated entities, what their challenges are and how we can help resolve those. I know the EU has put a tremendous amount of focus on funding these types of initiatives. Really understanding once that comes from an idea and innovation exercise into how that can be commercialized, I think can still be a little bit challenging, as well as what does it mean? Me coming from a commercial company, we put a lot of stock in our own patents and IPR, our intellectual property rights. What does this mean when we cooperate with other entities? And we need to do that. But making sure that frameworks are in place for us to be able to thrive as a company, but still be able to share and to collaborate and together. That needs to be done, as I mentioned earlier, but I think it is a challenge to do. I think the other aspect is really making sure that the regulatory frameworks are in place for the stakeholders in order to take advantage of some of these technologies. If you start looking at software as a capital expenditure versus just a grid infrastructure and how that looks to the ratepayers who are paying essentially for that infrastructure in the end, making sure that we have very innovative and very progressive regulatory frameworks in place that can help take advantage of some of the new technologies very easily will also be, I think, a key part.
Right, thanks. So that's very operational issues that the governments, both of the ASEAN, but also the EU support schemes could take into consideration when willing to target these acceleration of the smart technologies uptake. Yeah, I'm sure that also provides some further food for thought. I noticed that we already have questions in the Q&A, and I would like to bring in my colleague, Giulia Cretti. She's the one that runs most of this project and also the lead author of the policy brief that we just published. Giulia, welcome. What do we have in terms of questions for the panelists? And I hope also that Henry is joining back in with his camera on. Yeah, please, Giulia.
Yes, thank you, Luis, and thank you to all the participants that asked their questions. I would like to start to pick one from Margot about the ASEAN Power Grid project, which I would like to remind is this big project that ASEAN has to connect Southeast Asia power grid system. And the question is, what can the ASEAN Power Grid project learn from the EU recent challenges to balance the energy trilemma? And the energy trilemma, of course, includes the three dimensions of reliability, affordability, and sustainability of energy. So here the question is really for someone that is accustomed to this challenge. So perhaps Liana or Henriette would like to answer. And specifically, what can you what's the lesson learned from the EU to combine this sustainability and energy security dimension? And then I would like to pick another question from Emil, more on the ASEAN side. So this could be for Benny or Henry. Are the renewables in ASEAN competitive when it comes to price, if we compare them to more traditional sources of energy like coal or oil? So who would like to start?
I'm happy to answer Marco's question very quickly, because I think we touched on it a little bit. When we start looking about the trail limit, obviously that's always the coup de grace, right? That's the end point for everyone to look at this. But I think when you start combining digital and have that thought of how is this going to be delivered operationally, not just how do we invest in green in the generation codes, as Dr. Chan mentioned earlier, but also the operational aspect of that is how is it delivered? What is this going to look like? How do we balance it? I think the Netherlands, as I mentioned, they now have a new construct of a congestion service provider because they are experiencing so much congestion from the feed-in tariffs. It's been taking advantage of, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have that problem, but it's still a problem that leads to grid instability. Whereas in Sweden, those feed-in tariffs haven't taken off quite as quickly. And so that's not a problem there. So we will have to look at the digitalization, I think, in order to help optimize what that looks like from the sustainability and the energy security. So I think for me, the number one question is what digital and what technology you're going to have to help with that balancing as you start to decarbonize your generation companies.
Thank you very much, Liana. That was very quick and comprehensive. Now perhaps Henry or Benny would like to take the second question.
May I take the second question? Today, it is amazing that with the dropping prices of solar and wind, they are the cheapest source of energy. The issue is that can we use all of them? So as Liana has pointed out, that we need a smart grid that can handle this entry of these solar and wind energies. Now, on so far as I can remember from my little knowledge of ASEAN power grid, actually ASEAN has a very active grid, exporting power from Laos to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. But aside from that, there's not really much development because as we discussed earlier about these archipelago structures. So my personal view is that if there's going to be any development, this ASEAN grid probably will take a little longer time. Now, Singapore is particularly very interested in this because when you talk about wind, Singapore Harbor is already congested. We have no place for the ship, so we don't have places for the windmill. Now, if we talk about solar, Singapore is very small. So obviously, no matter how we build solar, it will not be enough. So Singapore is very interested in these ASEAN power grid things. But again, as all this issue about national security, as all this issue about cyber securities, and even the submarine cable from Vietnam to Singapore, we have already seen how the Australian supposedly solar power export to Singapore is being cancelled in a way. Because if you look at the Nord Stream 1, submarine cables cannot be very reliable. So ASEAN, again, you're seeing a very interesting cases that I think a very comprehensive evaluation of the whole situation is needed. Because to my collection, only Indonesia now is putting larger scale energy storage system in the form they start constructing a dam. All the existing ASEAN projects with energy storage, most of them, or practically essentially all of them, are talking about battery storage, which is only good for 4 hours. So that is what I know about the ASEAN situations. Maybe Benny can share it. He knows a lot more than we did.
Right.
Benny?
Yes, if I can join that discussion on that. I mean, first point that highlighting on, I mean, responding to the issue on the ASEAN power grid first, like, it's, I kind of against the comment that saying not much progress that's happening in that region, but as the people who are working on this topic, that allow me to also make some highlights. Maybe as mentioned earlier, there are already 7,000 megawatt cross-border interconnection, but that's only system to system, meaning that if the one power plant connected in Laos and it connected to the Laos electricity system, and then have an interconnection to the Thailand energy system. But beyond that, there is also, I think, 15,000 megawatt of point-to-point interconnection that's already happening in the region, between the countries, directly point-to-point. So there are, I mean, that's going to be, allow me to highlight that there is already, in fact, significant progress that we have in ASEAN power grids. But as you all know, that's going to be, I mean, the situation in every country is different. The reliability, the infrastructure between the power system in Laos with the Thailand is in different levels. As Liana mentioned, I mean, the technology, the digitalization system between the two is in different level. Then connecting is not an easy case, but somehow we manage to have a progress on pursuing this aspiration. And now comparing to the previous one, is also connected. Previously, the ASEAN power grid is only in the sense of whatever the cheapest. Let's bring it to the system. I mean, it's going to be, but now it's looking to utilization of the renewable energy resource. So as Luis mentioned that we have a lot of hydro in Laos that can be utilized not only to fulfill the demand in Laos or neighboring countries, but somehow will be expected to be connected to the Indonesia or also, which is, I can mention, there's already ongoing process that assessment on the subsea cables to connect it also with the Philippines. So there's, I mean, there's of course the technology is discussing, the digitalization is playing a very important role on how the thing moves this thing forwards. Then the question that is renewable energy is already competitive enough or cheaper. Yes and no. I mean, it's going to be in some area is already yes. That's going to be in some areas already yes. We already seeing that renewable energy. I mean, we did some study on the ILCOE 2 years ago. We compile, I mean, collect all around, I think around 150s of the power. 150s of the data from the real projects going to be, and then they identified there is area where the renewable energy, solar or wind, is already competitive enough compared to the coal or compared to the diesel, particularly in the rural and remote area. But it's not a massive. I mean, it's not applicable to all of the context yet. It's going to be, and then. Yeah, that's the situation that we have, and then how to bring because for example, in the case of Indonesia, the calculation is being made on average on the whole area. It's not only on that specific area where the renewable energy is cheaper than coal, but the calculation is made that renewable energy has to be able to compete with average costs in the whole area. So this is the efforts are being made to bring more renewable energy to the system. I stop here for the discussion. Back to you, Yola.
All right. I was just thinking when I heard you speaking about the surplus of green electricity we just had in Europe, and I've also asked Henriette to join in again. We just had in Europe the new regulations for green hydrogen, and also the incentive that these are going to be produced from this surplus green electricity production. And I was wondering, Henriette, you mentioned in the start of your talk this upcoming conference between the EU and ASEAN on energy transition and green hydrogen. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on how you see. Could we expect, for instance, if the EU sets rules for green hydrogen, that would be relevant for the ASEAN region? Curious to hear if you have to say more about that, or other things you want to respond to with regard to the questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear me, because I can hear you very shabbily. So I'm not sure if it really works. So I think your question was related to hydrogen. And indeed, as I mentioned, we are having a conference this week on hydrogen, and it's part of this new strategy for how we want to engage with partners. So I don't think I can say so much about it, so much more, but and really I don't hear you well, so I apologize.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll go
Luis,
back to.
may I come in?
Yeah, please. Henry.
Because I just read a report from Harvard Kennedy School about the green hydrogen ecosystem. And then that is very interesting because they put China, Canada, and US as in the forefront of ecosystem in hydrogen. And but I personally think is this: hydrogen is definitely something that will happen one day. But the consensus in the industry seems to be that if hydrogen is going to play a very serious role, that has to be in the 2040s or 2050s. Because hydrogen has a competition in the sense that we are using already a lot of hydrogen, but still in these chemical factories and in this industrial process. And definitely for electric system to compete on the hydrogen, it will take some time. After this industrial application of hydrogen, the next thing that they are actually looking at is on hydrogen fuel cells in the transport vehicles. So for the electric grid, I think hydrogen is something that technologically there's still some work to do, because electricity has a very interesting character. It cannot be stored. You must change it to chemical like batteries or mechanical like the dams. Now, if you're going to use hydrogen, you have a problem that the place that you can produce them very cheaply is surprising the Middle East. Because in Middle East, you can have 2,000 hours of solar energy every day, every year, which ASEAN only has about 1,200. So it seems that the technological roadmap in the next 10, 15 years is going to be on the consumer side, is going to be the heat pump replacing the natural gas. In power generations, we will have a smart grid replacing these existing coal-fired plants or natural gas plant. Because until 10 years ago, everybody think that hydrogen is the future and is the clean energy. But right now we understand that hydrogen has half of the carbon footprint of the coal. So there is a lot of changing dynamics, and which actually EU can do a lot, because I don't see any place as committed to this renewable energy as EU. And then next probably is China, because I was surprised the EU target is supposed to reach 40% by 2030. But now EU already revised it to 45%. You are the only place in the world that is able to revise a specific target, obviously because of the Ukraine war whatsoever. So this is my take on it.
Yeah, the objective for 2030 is actually at least minus 55% of greenhouse gas emission reductions compared to 1990 levels. So it's really super ambitious. But I also feel that, as Benny also talked about, that this regulatory structures of the EU is also, and the carbon pricing, and also the externalization of the carbon pricing through CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, is one of the things. But now the green industrial policy and indeed the twin transition of digital and green are also really a forceful effort. Julia, we almost have to go to Ambassador Pou Sotirak for the final remarks, but maybe one last question, maybe a short question that is available.
Yes, sure. I would like to maybe pick the one from Orhan. Why do we ignore wind, renewable energy mechanically, and skip to the other kind, since we have millions of vehicles that can be done through them? Perhaps this is again a question from our ASEAN speakers. Who would like to take that?
Now, if Benny is not going to take it, I think I can look into it this way. Europe is very blessed that you have a lot of very windy places. Your North Sea, your Baltic Sea. So you have the highest wind resources in the world. So it makes sense for you to have the wind. And in fact, no matter how successful is the solar, if you look at the European energy studies, you'll find actually you put a lot of emphasis on wind, which I think is quite natural, because I was surprised that out of Scotland, that you can even have 3,000 hours of wind to drive the windmill, which is amazing. I mean, that's the most windy place in the world.
I will add to that, however, though, that we have to curtail wind frequently in the North Sea because we don't have the transmission infrastructure to take advantage of all of that wind. So it does come with challenges. I just have to say that.
Oh, I agree. Actually, it was come a point in time that China, as early as about 5-6 years ago, the solar curtailment on a nation basis is around 20 to 25%. And now they were able to cut it to 3 to 4. So the distribution setup, and definitely if you want to have the transmission, after transmission, you have one windmill that has 15 megawatt output. So how to handle that, you really definitely need a smart grid. So it's a very complex and dynamic situations. But I definitely put a lot of hope on the EU in this space because there's a saying that necessity is the mother of innovation. And consider what you experienced last year from the war on natural gas, and consider the drive in EU toward electric vehicles, toward heat pump. And right now you are start thinking about in the next 10, 20 years, you are going to make your electric vehicle, your home system, going to be a fit-in source. So all these things is that Europe now has the best incentive to drive innovation in electric grid space. And you have the highest carbon price in the world. So you give a lot of money for innovations.
And I would say, and add to that, that with what I do at Nokia right now, I have seen more startups focused on energy optimization in Europe than anywhere else I've seen. Very, very few in the US. I'm starting to see a few when I was at Distributech again, but I see the majority of that innovation happening in the EU, and I'm seeing a lot of work around optimization as well as vehicle to grid, which will be coming up very, very shortly in the next couple of years, where we can utilize our vehicles, which are 80% of the time idle, as a major storage capacity for the grid. So it's good. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you see that people are getting fun of it. Huh? For instance, these appliances that you have cheaper electricity at certain points of the day. And it also creates a bit of positive spirit. And you also see a movement of people that, want Putin really not to benefit anymore from gas and oil revenues. So for that reason are super motivated to reduce their energy usage. I would like to move now to our esteemed cooperator in this project, Ambassador Pu Sotirak, previously Minister also for Energy in Cambodia, and a distinguished career as a top-level diplomat, deeply involved also in the Cambodian ASEAN chairmanship of 2022, and a huge source of networks and relevant contacts for us. Ambassador Pu, please, the floor is for you for the closing remarks of this webinar.
Yes, Louise, can all of you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are now coming to the end of what proven to be a very interactive discussion on twin transition, green and digital in EU-ASEAN partnership. I'm following the discussion with intense interest, and I cannot say how pleased I am that everybody have contributed so much, and particularly hearing a strong commitment from the European Union to help ASEAN move forward in this direction. As we wrapping up this public event, please allow me to emphasize the need for the EU and ASEAN to forge their cooperation even more resolutely to hasten the delivery of renewable and green energy source with the use of digital advancement in order to achieve sustainable, smart, clean, and efficient energy system. As both ASEAN and EU embark on a twin transition of green and digital energy source, I wish to add a few observations, or you can take it as a new idea, on top of what I heard one excellent presentation and discussion we have heard in the past hour from all the eminent speakers. Now, let's put things in context. The COVID-19 pandemic placed digital transformation in the national development agenda of all countries worldwide. Moreover, the abnormal extreme weather in many countries in recent years, especially in 2022, likewise placed climate change squarely on the top concern of many countries, and how to address the twin challenges that cut across national boundary and transcends technical, financial, and policy challenges to become the agenda of all countries embrace. And climate change score top on a list of concern in Southeast Asia as a proven case just now. There is a universal consensus that addressing the twin challenges require global cooperation. I try to expand just beyond the EU, ASEAN, and to share best practices. Developed countries must play the leading role in climate data collections and extreme weather mitigation need. Extreme weather mitigation need robust scientific research, which they can better provide, they meaning the advanced country, developed country. Besides, the developed country are leading in digital technology development, and they are much further in a digital transformation space than those of us in ASEAN member state. In recognitions of the twin imperative challenges that the world have faced today, CICP and Klingendal organized this online public event today with the recognition that handling climate change rests on decarbonization, which means accelerating electrification, ranging from replacing fuel in the heating to electrical vehicle. Watch out for EV, it's becoming very trendy now, and replacing ICE, internal combustion engine, in the transportation system. At the same time, renewable energy have not only achieved cost parity in conventional electric generation mean, but it is also more economical in many countries. Dr. Benny and Henry have alluded to it during their presentation. Therefore, a good renewable-based power system not only helps solve climate problem, but also good for economic development incentive. We cannot afford to miss out. A robust renewable-based power system needs a smart grid. This point has been made again and again by Henry. Anchor on digital technology. The smart grid present the area where climate change and digital technology intersects. We hope this online event will start an active discussion on these important issues of building a smart grid. EU is a forefront and an early mover in this space, and its experience can help ASEAN move faster in the inevitably transition to the smart grid. Now, in conclusion, I wish to extend my special thanks to Henriette Feldman, to Dr. Benny Suryadi, to Lina Jo Alt, and of course to my good friend Dr. Henry Chan, for sharing their rich perspective on the issues relevant to this public event. I am thankful to Louise Vanchek and to also Gilead Kreti for their excellent skill in moderating both the whole session as well the Q&A, as well as the entire team from Klingendal for putting up this resounding public event. It has been a productive collaboration between CICP and Klingendal, and my institute appreciate the opportunity to serve as an active partner for this worthy project. We are looking forward, we meaning CICP, looking forward to remaining as productive as possible this year going forward, especially for the big conference at the end of this year in Cambodia. So thank you very much. I wish everyone excellent health. I turn the floor back to Louise.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ambassador Phu Sotirak. Much appreciated, and we are also very much looking forward to go to Cambodia, most likely in November, and to talk about, you know, these digital issues that we discussed in 2021, the twin transition of green and digital this year, and then in the forthcoming meetings, the discussions on climate adaptation throughout the region. And we think they make a very logical circle of activities for this project. And there are also fields where really the EU and ASEAN region can gain from cooperating. Thank you to everybody for watching. We still have a poll with 5 questions on how you experienced your participation in this webinar, and we are grateful for any responses. And we hope to see you back at the future activities. So thank you again to all the speakers, to everybody who contributed to this webinar, and we look forward to cooperating with you in the future again. And we especially look forward to a fantastic twin transition of green and digital, both in the EU and the ASEAN regions. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a good rest of the day.